All right. So, hello everybody. My name is Carl Lerche. I currently work at EngineYard, who graciously sent me out here to come speak to you guys. So thank you. I'm also on the Ruby on Rails team, and we're working hard to get Rails 3 out, and hopefully it'll be sometime the next week. Fingers crossed. Hopefully. So nobody find any show-stopping bugs. So today, I'd like to talk to you about a tool that Yehuda and I wrote over the course of the past year, Bundler. Some of the motivations that drove us to write it, and some of the difficulties and solutions that we came across. So Bundler started about a year ago, but there's a lot more history to it than that. Bundler's predecessor was part of the MERB project. I don't know how many people here have used it or still use it. But MERB's a web framework that was similar to Ruby on Rails. One significant difference between MERB and Rails, at least at the time, was MERB split the framework up into lots of different small components, granular components. And each of these components were released as gems, and each of these gems had their own dependencies. So gem install MERB, like on a fresh machine, might install up to 50 different gems. Also, MERB released fairly often, so there were many different versions of each of these gems. So as you can imagine, managing these gems by hand became very difficult. So we wrote a tool that we released with MERB to help with this. Then about a year and a half ago, there was the Rails MERB merge, and we were able to take that as an opportunity to step back and to look at the dependency problem again, and really look at what problems we hit and what were the things we're trying to solve. So one of the biggest pain points that we hit working on MERB was really the can't activate foo, already activated foo of a different version. It's nothing new. I've been hitting this ever since I was using Ruby. I'm sure anybody here, at least that uses Rubygems, hits this too. MERB's dependency graph just aggravated the problem. But it was a good thing that we hit this with MERB, because I think MERB was one of the first Ruby projects to early on split itself into lots of different components. But nowadays there are lots of Ruby libraries that are doing it as well. Like Rails 3 has a lot more dependencies now than it did before. RSpec 2 split itself up into many different frameworks. And Data Mapper as well split itself up into lots of different gems. So hitting this pain with MERB made us realize that we needed to write a tool to address this problem. So something that Yehuda and I like to do is to just do a Google search for this problem, this error, so that we can see what people do to get it, what are the issues, what are their workarounds, what do they do to fix the problem. So, last I did it, 48,000 results, and this is only people who post to the internet. There are probably a lot more people that hit this problem. So I'm going to go through a few of these. This one was actually posted to the EngineYard ticket tracker for AppCloud, which is one of our products, but was posted a year ago, so the product was still fairly new. It's before it used Bundler. So the error was just can't activate HPRCOT 081, already activated HPRCOT 06. And the proposed solution here was just SSH into all of your servers and uninstall the offending gem, like the offending version of HPRCOT, which is quite annoying to have to do. It was the best that could be done back then, and it really would not have been a fix if there were more than one applications running on that box, because what if there were two applications and both needed different versions of HPRCOT? And reaction photos by Evan Phoenix, he did not know what these were going to be used for. Next error was posted to the Rails issue tracker, I think it was this past March. This happened when booting up a Rails 2.3 application using Thin. And somebody would get this error. I'll revisit the specifics of it a bit later. So it was can't activate rack 1.0, already activated rack 1.1. The proposed patch was to just change ActionPack's dependency from tilde greater than 1.0 to greater than or equals to 1.0. So this would have let ActionPack work with rack 1.1, but specifically that's what we were trying not to allow. I mean, rack 1.1 had some subtle changes to it that were backwards incompatible. A lot of gem authors actually take this approach when they hit, this issue because, well, it's hard to deal with. And this is my favorite one, I mean, one of them at least. This was, again, just posted a Stack Overflow, and this person was trying to get a Rails application running on DreamHost. This Rails application depended on Rails 2.3.5, which in turn depended on rack tilde greater than 1.0.1. And when they try to boot it, they would get the gem activation error. So what was the proposed fix? First, vendor Rails and rack into your application. Step 2, open up ActionPack, go to the lines 34 and 35. Step 3, comment out the code that requires rack tilde greater than 1.0.1. And then step 4, explicitly load rack 1.0 on top of rack 1.1, or actually explicitly load rack 1.0.1 on top of rack 1.0.0. Too many versions. And then just pray everything works, because at this point they just loaded 2 different versions of one gem into memory at once. I mean, probably would have worked because they were close in versions, but I cannot recommend this. There we go. So my point here is not to make fun of these people, because it's not their fault. This is there really isn't a good solution to these problems back then. But the point was just to make clear that this problem was abundant and people usually don't know what's going on. The canonical solution is when you hit this to just uninstall all of your gems and reinstall them and hope until everything works. And then just don't touch anything. All right, so now I'm going to try to explain the specific problem that happened with Thin, ActionPack, and Rails, rack. Let's assume rack 1.1 is installed in the system, as well as rack 1.0.1. So first, Thin is started up, and it depends on rack greater or equal to 1.0. So since 1.1 is on the system, that gem gets activated. Then Rails is activated after that, which in turn activates ActionPack, and ActionPack depends on rack tilde greater than 1.0. So that the dependency that ActionPack has is what will raise the exception at this point, because tilde greater than 1.0 basically means anything greater than 1.0 but less than 1.1. But in this case, rack 1.1 was already activated, so you get the error. Yet there is, given those gems, there is an environment that will satisfy all the dependencies. But to figure this out, when Thin activates rack, it has to look ahead and see that Rails in turn is also going to activate rack, and look across the whole system and figure out the best match. Rubygems, however, just activates one gem at a time. So, it's a problem. I know what's going on. What if we just solved it? How hard could that be? Well, turns out it's very hard. But there are lots of package managers like Yum and apt-get that face the same problem. Because unlike Rubygems, Yum and apt-get, they can only install one package, one version of each package. So they have to look at the entire set of dependencies and install the best result for that. So it's doable somehow. I don't really know yet when I hit that. So I Google searched and figured out, well, what they all do is use heuristics. So resolving dependencies is a huge graph problem. But there's only a small range of solutions that we really care about out of all the possible, solutions. So if we could just optimize the whatever algorithm we use to search sane results first, if everything goes well, if it runs too long, the result, if we ever get one back, will be something we don't care about. Like maybe the dependency, set of dependencies works with MERB 03 but rack 1.2 and MERB auth 092. But if you get that, you did something wrong in your dependencies anyway. So that was the goal, figure out a set of heuristics that works. And this is basically what we came up with. So just a quick overview of the algorithm is get a list of all the dependencies that you want for the system, sort it via these criteria, take the first dependency, find all matching gems, so like rack greater than 1.0, find all versions of rack greater than or 1.0, activate the first one and put it on a list of activated ones, take all of its dependencies and push it back onto the unhandled list, and then recurse until it's done. So the first criteria is the gem already activated, simply because some gems share the same dependency, so you'll end up at the same point in the resolving algorithm. So when you do, you just want to check to see if the new dependency is satisfied by the gem that's already activated. If it is, continue on. If it doesn't, you then backtrack to when that gem was already activated. Next is, are we currently in a conflicting state for a certain gem? Which basically means, like, for example, if we start resolving and then we hit a conflict on rack, basically internally the gem activation error, what we want to do is just, when we backtrack, is try rack again as fast as possible so we can get out of the conflicting state for rack. Otherwise, the algorithm just does a lot of work and at the end hits its head against the same rack conflict. And finally, just the number of possible matches for dependency. So if action pack needs to be, is on the dependency list as well as rack, but rack matches 3 gems and action pack, has 20 possible gems, better resolve rack first because it will limit the permutations later on. And then the last thing that's important for this algorithm is efficient backtracking. So what we did is just simply every time we branch off internally, we set a marking point, and then when we hit a conflict later on, we figure out the best place to jump back to. And actually looking at the code's kind of interesting. I feel we probably just abuse the Ruby stack because everything is local variables, and every time we recurse, it's wrapped by a catch block. Yeah. So that's how the resolver basically works in a nutshell. So now, how does bundler work? So bundler manages dependencies on an application level. Every application that uses bundler has a file named gem file at its root. And the file is basically just a manifest of the application's dependencies. Here's an example. This is pretty simple, actually. There are 2 important bits, 2 types of information in here, and one is the source that bundler will look for remotely when it installs gems. So in this case, I'm just saying, when I install gems, only look at rubygems.org. But bundler also supports installing gems from Git or local paths, and for specifics, just look at the documentation. And next is just a list of all your application's dependencies, and the API looks fairly similar to Rubygems, just gem followed by the gem name and then its version requirements. The next step is to activate bundler, I guess, inside of your application, because bundler won't do any magic to inject itself. To do this, you require bundler/setup, and this you should probably do right after requiring Rubygems. For example, in a Rails application, this would happen in config/boot.rb. when you require this file, bundler is going to find your gem file and read it in, get a list of all the dependencies it needs to satisfy. With that list of dependencies, it runs it through the resolver, gets back a result, which is just an array of gems to activate, push the paths for each of those gems onto the load path, and that's basically it. After this happens, you can just require your libraries as you normally would, and they will be at the version that you specify in the gem file. So requiring bundler setup is equivalent to just doing all the Rubygems operations up front. And bundler offers more than just runtime tools. It also has a set of command line tools that you can use to just to help manage the dependencies of the application. So the main one is bundle install. After creating the gem file or cloning an application from a source control repository, you just run bundle install. And what this will do, again, find your gem file, resolve the dependencies, but this time against all the remote sources you specified. So it will resolve the dependencies against all gems on RubyForge, for example, or Rubygems.org now. And then get the list and install all the gems that it needs to install. Every time that bundle install is run after that, if you haven't modified the gem file, it won't do anything. Or if you made a slight modification, it'll just figure out what's different and just install that. So now I'm going to talk a bit about some of bundler's core philosophies. And one of that is isolation. Only gems that are specified in the gem file will be available to the application. So for example, if MySQL is not listed in the gem file, even if you try to require it, and even if it's on the system, it won't be there. You'll get a load error. And the reason for that is just too many times, I'm going to start working on a new application that already exists. I clone it locally, I try to get started, and I realize after hitting many errors that there are a whole number of dependencies that are just not listed anywhere. So at that point, the only thing that can be done is try running the tests, see them all fail, realize it's because a dependency is missing, install it, and just repeat until everything runs. It's pretty annoying. Having a complete list of all the dependencies is a good thing. So in development, just if you're developing an application on your local machine and you run bundle install, by default it's going to install gems to a location that's global to the system. And by default, that's just the same location that Rubygems uses. That way, if you have many applications on your system, you don't constantly need to re-download and install the same gems. What bundler does to achieve the isolation is uses Rubygems and does some tricks to just make everything appear as if they're not there, unless they're listed in the gem file. This is just done to make the development experience friendlier. Like if you install Rails, generate an application, and try to boot it, you don't need to run bundle install first. But in production mode, bundle install has a flag, just ---- deployment. This flag is just a collection of what we consider best deployment practices. And one of this is to install gems into a subdirectory of the application. By default, that's vendor/bundle. And there are a number of reasons why it's better to do this in production. One of them is, well, once you install it into a subdirectory of the application, you can just tar up the entire application and send it to another server, and all the dependencies will be copied with it. There are also a number of edge case bugs that are avoided by doing this. I'm not going to mention them, just hopefully so that you don't do them. Another philosophy is bundler tries to make things as reproducible as possible. It seems obvious, but think of a case of you worked on an application a year ago, and you haven't touched it since then, and now you need to make a change because a client requests something, I don't know why, but you have to get that application started again. that can be difficult because most likely the vast majority of gems that are used in that application have been updated, probably significantly. And you will need to remember specifically what gems you used a year ago. Yes, you might have a list of like, oh, these are the gems I installed, but probably their child dependencies will have been updated too. And you don't have a list anywhere. So Bundler's answer is a lock file. What this is simply a file that exists next to gemfile, and it's named gemfile.lock. And this is a file that Bundler creates and manages for you. And it contains a list of every gem that the application uses, including like top-level gems as well as child dependencies. So after running bundle install the first time, this file will be dumped for you. Every time you run a bundle install after, if you have not changed the gem file, and there is a gemfile.lock, the next time you run bundle install, it's going to use exactly the same versions that are in that file. So that means if you depend on Rails, for example, Rails depends on rack. So let's say the first time you run bundle install, it gets rack 1.0.1, and then maybe rack 1.0.2 is released. The next time like another developer runs bundle install, they're still going to get 1.0.1. So gems are not updated explicitly for you. So lock files are not local to the machine. Lock files should be checked into version control. Like that, any other developer, like you have developers on your team, clone your repository and they run bundle install, they'll get the exact same set of gems that you use, which will keep your environment homogeneous. This is also on, when you deploy to your servers, it's good to keep the same gems that you use in development. So what happens when you actually want to update your gems? I mean, let's say that you add a new gem into your gem file. I don't know, whatever, like gem rack, and you run bundle install. So this is a new gem you just added into your gem file. Bundler will notice that it's new and it's not in the log file already. So it will keep all gems that are already in the log file at the same version and just add the new one. If that new gem depends on something that's already in the log file, it's going to stay at the same version. So another common operation is just you don't want to change the gem file, but you want to, like, you just have gem rack in there, and when you installed it, you got gem rack 1.1, and rack 1.2 is released. You don't want to modify the gem file to get it. So there's the bundle update command, which will just tell Bundler to grab the newest version of rack and use that. So I just went over, fairly brief overview of the core features of Bundler. There are a lot of other like helper commands and just nice to have tools that are well documented now in our documentation site, I think gembundler.com. So what's next? So Bundler has been in development, like I mentioned, about a year. 1.0 final is going to be released very soon. I think we're just, probably the same time as Rails, which will be soon, hopefully. We're like in an RC series right now. And we've learned a lot over the past year. One thing we learned is building a package management system is a lot harder than it seems. Thus far, the past year, development on Bundler has been fairly isolated from development on Rubygems. And this is a good thing because in the past year, we were able to experiment a lot. We were able to evolve a lot and change features and just try to figure out what the best way to do this is. But now that Bundler is done, whatever that means, we could probably just start thinking about, well, what makes sense in Rubygems instead of Bundler? What improvements now can we make to Rubygems to help Bundler improve? So the most obvious thing that comes to mind is simply, take the Bundler's resolver and put that in Rubygems proper. There's been a little bit of talk of doing this. Again, everybody's been busy, like finishing bundler and everything else, but the resolver is already pretty generic. It would be nice to just have that resolver in Rubygems proper. Maybe an API could be this. It doesn't matter what it is. This is basically just an inline gem file. The main thing is there needs to be a way to specify all the gems up front. Another thing that I would really like to see, and we start a discussion of this, is build dependencies. Build dependencies basically mean, like, I'm building a gem from source. This is what I need. So this hasn't really been needed in the past, but like I briefly mentioned, Bundler lets you install gems from a Git repository. With Nokogiri, for example, Nokogiri has a build dependency on rack, but this time RACC, to convert its CSS grammar into a Ruby file. So we can't actually have Bundler install Nokogiri from Git unless it can tell us this is what is needed to convert, to just build Nokogiri. Another thing that I would really like to have is just optional and recommended dependencies. The main difference between recommended dependencies is that it's an optional dependency, but that's just installed by default. So an optional dependency is just saying, hey, I don't need gem X, but if it's there, it has to be this version. An easy example is just like a gem that works on its own, but has a Rails plugin that requires Rails 3.0. Again, optional dependencies are something that exists in a lot of other package managers, and I'm going to either try to implement it or try to get somebody else to do it, if anybody here wants to try. And the final thing I'm going to mention, because I'm running out of time, is just provides and meta gems. And this is basically just saying, let's say you depend on gem, on JSON. But the gem JSON Pure provides exactly the same API. So JSON Pure could then say, I provide JSON, such that any time your application, a gem just depends on JSON in your gem file, you could say, well, I'm actually using you could just write gem JSON Pure, and then the resolver would be able to just see that, and oh, I can replace the JSON gem with JSON Pure here, so let's not even bother with JSON. So that's about all the time I have. I got, was it 3 minutes? I don't know if I have time for questions or not. All right, questions? I don't know. I don't know if I have time. All right.
Yes.
Can
I ask this? So hopefully, real quick, the JSON example you gave, there was a big controversy, small controversy about JSON, and so Charles Nutter was given permission to check in a JSON gem that is using JRuby, and some people said, oh my gosh, if they're not exactly API compatible with the C version, then the world will end and everything will be broken. And I said, well, you know what, a bunch of people like Facebook or all these things depend on JSON, so you just can't even, we don't know if it's compatible or not because we can't use it. And also like Nokogiri and things, if sometimes you use Java libraries, C libraries, they're not compatible. Is this a problem, or is Bundler going to solve this?
Well, I mean, software is imperfect anyway. I don't think, yes, that could possibly be a problem, but I don't think it's, the potential of somebody doing something crazy needs to be worried about when adding this feature. I mean, the same feature exists in package managers for decades, and people already do crazy stuff. So having this feature, I don't think is going to add more craziness to the mix, but it will make certain things like the JSON and JSON Pure situation easier to manage, at least from my point of view in Bundler. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Martin Dust. I have a question. You showed the Bundler update thing. Now, what I think is that in many cases, people just leave things at some version because they know that it works the way it works, and they never try to update because something could get wrong. But is there something like a try update in Bundler that I could say, try this update, run all the tests, and then if it works, okay. If not, let's go back.
So the great thing about source control is I'll do that exact thing for you. I mean, like Git, I mean, you have your gem file and your gemfile.lock in Git. If you run bundle update, all it will do is like it will like modify your gemfile.lock. So you can then run the tests, and if they don't work, just do git reset hard, and it will revert your gemfile.lock. And then you could then again rerun bundle install, and it will get you back to the previous scenario exactly like it was before. All right, that's just about it. So thank you very much.